All right, today we're diving into a local story that actually has some pretty big things to say about renting pretty much everywhere. There's a tenant union in the UK town of Cheltenham, and they've just laid out what they're calling a full-blown renting crisis. But they're not just complaining. They've also got a detailed plan to fix it. So let's get into what they're seeing and what they want to do about it. So to get a sense of the scale here, let's just start with one number, 40,000. According to the tenant union, that's roughly how many people rent their home in Cheltenham. So we're not talking about some tiny niche problem. This is an issue that affects a huge chunk of the entire community.
And this gets to the heart of it. The union put out this article that isn't just a list of grievances, it's a real roadmap for change. So the big question is, what are they actually demanding the council do?
Okay, so before we get to their solutions, we've got to understand the problem as they see it. This first section is all about defining the crisis from the tenant union's perspective.
Just look at this breakdown. The union's data suggests that more than a third of all homes in Cheltenham are rented. Think about that for a second. That means the rental market isn't some side issue. Its health and stability are absolutely fundamental to the whole town's economy. Now, before we look at the next bit of data, we need to quickly get our heads around a key term, the affordability threshold. It's actually a pretty simple idea. Basically, if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, you're considered to be financially stretched. It's a benchmark planners use all the time.
And this chart right here, well, this is the heart of the crisis they're describing. According to the union, a typical renter in Cheltenham is already spending between 30 and 40% of their income on rent. That puts them right on the edge or just over that affordability line. But the really alarming part is that second bar. It shows that a big group of tenants are forking over more than half of their entire income just to have a place to live.
So, when you're facing a reality like that, what's the plan? Well, the union hasn't just pointed out problems. They've put forward 5 very specific actions they argue the local council could and should take right now.
So here's their 5-point plan at a glance. It's a real mix of things, from going after short-term lets like Airbnbs, all the way to creating a new public letting agency. Let's dig into what each of these would actually look like.
Okay, first up, they're targeting the boom in short-term lets. The plan has 2 parts. First, make anyone with a property on a site like Airbnb get a license. Second, hit those properties with a higher rate of council tax. The goal here is just simple economics. You make it less attractive to rent to tourists for a weekend and more profitable to rent to local people for the long term. That should, in theory, push more properties back into the regular rental market. Second, they're saying the council needs to start tracking the right thing. The union's argument is that knowing the average rent price in pounds is, well, it's kind of useless on its own. They want the council to track rent as a percentage of what local people actually earn. That shifts the whole conversation from just a price tag to real-world affordability, giving you a much truer picture of the market's health.
The third idea is pretty interesting. Create a public alternative. The plan would be to use the council's own housing company to set up an ethical letting agency. Now, this agency would have to compete with private ones, but the idea is that by offering fairer rents and longer, more secure tenancies, it would create market pressure that forces the entire private sector to up its game.
Number 4 is all about accountability. See, right now in Cheltenham, only certain kinds of rental properties need a license, like big houses with lots of people sharing. The union is demanding that this be made universal, a borough-wide licensing scheme for every single private landlord. This would mean regular inspections and would, they argue, guarantee that all rental homes are safe and up to standard, not just a handful.
And their last demand goes after wasted housing. The union points out that you've got all these homes just sitting empty for months or even years, while at the same time people are desperate to find a place to rent. They want the council to use its powers, whether that's through taxes or other measures, to get the owners of these vacant properties to bring them back onto the market and increase the housing supply.
So, the union claims all these ideas are totally within the council's power to do, which leads to the obvious question, why haven't they happened? Well, this next section gets into the union's answer, and for them, it all boils down to one thing: political priorities. Now, in its article, the union draws a pretty direct line between policy and politics. They point to a key councillor who's in charge of the local economy.
And then they highlight public records which, they say, show that this councilor's political party has taken donations from what they call property-linked interests. So based on that, the union is asking the question, whose priorities are really being served here? And that brings us to the final part of their plan. Because they're not just making requests and hoping for the best, they've actually laid out a whole strategy for how they plan to build enough power to force these issues onto the agenda.
And their strategy is really a classic grassroots organizing playbook. It's a three-step process. First, build their numbers by getting more tenants involved and collecting data and stories through surveys. Second, use that collective power to organize campaigns and put coordinated pressure on the councilors. And third, fund all of this through small independent donations so they don't have to answer to anyone else.
And honestly, you could boil their entire argument down to this one really powerful quote from their article. If the council won't act, we will make them. That sentence pretty much says it all. They see this as a political fight, and it's one they're ready for.
So this story from one town really leaves us with a much bigger, more universal question. When you have a huge group of citizens and their elected council who seem to have a fundamental disagreement about what's important, who's actually responsible for finding a way forward? It's a question that gets to the very heart of how local democracy is supposed to function.